Hi everyone, welcome to Exploring the Build, and Happy New Year! If you've just found this place, then welcome, and if you're returning, I'm glad to have you back. I'm Alex, and this is my channel where we theorycraft and explore different character builds for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. Today, we are returning to our Haven board game series of character builds by now going through the character classes from the sequel to Gloomhaven, and that is Frosthaven. We're going to be trying to take the character classes from the Frosthaven board game and recreate them in Dungeons & Dragons. Now, since Frosthaven is a newer game compared to the rest of the Gloomhaven series, as well because it is a sequel, a lot of these character classes are going to be a bit more complex mechanically, and therefore going to be a bit more complex to recreate in Dungeons & Dragons. The last thing to know about our Frosthaven game is that eventually we're going to get to locked character classes, because like the other Haven board game series, they are sort of legacy or legacy-like, where as you progress through the game, you can unlock different things. Some of those things that we unlock are different characters. Because this is a newer game, and a lot of these characters are locked at the beginning of the game, there's going to be some major spoiler warnings a little down the line. For now, though, we're going to be working through our 6 starting character classes that are completely open and free for us to root around in and see what they have to offer. Today, starting off our first of the 6 starting character classes is the Drifter. The Drifter is probably the simplest of the 6 starting character classes from Frosthaven. They don't add in a whole bunch of new mechanics, they just take mechanics from the base game Gloomhaven series and sort of amp them up a little bit. Nothing new, just redone in a new way. As my group called them, the Drifter is the everything bagel. They are a jack-of-all-trades type of character. They really like generalizing into a bunch of different things rather than specializing into something specific. Well, at least sort of. To be fair, a lot of characters throughout the Haven series of board games are meant to be versatile in order to adapt to different players' playstyles and still have players feel like they're enjoying the character. The Drifter, however, takes us to the next level. Essentially, their main mechanic is based around playing and maintaining persistent effects. Each one of these persistent effects gives them a buff of a specific playstyle. However, the buffs aren't necessarily fully permanent, and you don't really want to have them all up at once. So the entire idea of the Drifter is picking and managing each of these buffs that you have throughout the course of a scenario. On paper, this sounds really cool since it makes the Drifter totally customizable even in the middle of a scenario. You don't have to sort of pick your build beforehand and then react. You don't have to pick your build beforehand. You can just go into a scenario and react to what your party needs in the moment. They are a pretty much blank slate. If you want to be more melee focused, you can buff your melee damage. If you want to go range, you can buff your range. If you want to focus on mobility or durability, there are cards for that too. And if you want to forgo everything else and just be a support who heals and buffs their allies, you can do that as well. The unfortunate part is that in practice, because we have so much choice in our cards and our abilities, it just means that the Drifter isn't that standout in anything that they specialize into. Without any persistent buffs up, you're actually really bad. And with a persistent buff up, you're very consistent at what you do, but you're not necessarily going to stand out. Instead of specializing and having some really interesting and amazing turns in Frosthaven, doing the one thing that you're good at, like a lot of the other classes will do, we're going to be very consistent at doing some things relatively well, at least whatever we pick to do. But, unlike other classes, we'll have the option to just completely change our playstyle mid-scenario if we wanted to do that. In terms of D&D, that same sort of fight between versatility and specialization is going to be true. In order to really capture this playstyle of the Drifter, we're going to be spreading ourselves very thin, going for versatility, as opposed to trying to just specialize into what they would normally do best. Technically, if you were playing this character, you could specialize and focus however you want. You could go all melee or all ranged, for examples. But for us, because we want to capture the Drifter as a whole, and not just how certain people would play the Drifter, we're going to want to try and literally get everything that the Drifter can do as a D&D class. That means we're going to want to have durability, mobility, melee, and ranged options, and even some support options as well. We're going to be adding a lot into this build, and we're going to try to really be a good, viable workhorse that has a lot of versatility and can really be consistent for their party. But we're not really doing anything super stand out, and we're not having any over-the-top turns either. To make it easier to follow, I'll be breaking down each of the abilities we get from our D&D features into different focus categories in order to make sure that we have all our bases covered for the versatility that we want. These focus categories are going to be melee, range, mobility, durability, support, and versatility for any features that could apply to more than one of the starter categories, to more than one of the basic categories. Before we start the build though, let's look at their flavor text, since all the Frosthaven classes got a bit more lore added to them to help with the world building of the game. The Inox clans of the Great Grove value their strength and self-reliance, but they cannot bury internal quarrels in time to repel the human empire's expansion into their lands. They paid dearly. Some Inox have retreated deeper into the most defensible areas of the forest. Others venture into other civilizations, employing their great size, woodcraft, and performative traditions in a variety of occupations. In fact, it is common practice among many clans to send their young warriors off into the larger world for a year so they can find themselves and discover their passion. Some of them never return, lured away by city life or, in rarer cases, discovering that their passion is the wilderness itself. These Inox revel in surviving off the land without allegiance or responsibility. They are the drifters, and there is no better place to test their skills than the north. Starting into the build now at character creation, with our lineage, we are an Inox, which, like our Gloomhaven character classes before us, is going to mean that we are a custom lineage, because it does not exist. For custom lineage, we're going to get to choose between dark vision and a skill. We can technically choose our size, medium or small, but we're going to go medium since Inox are on the larger scale of fantasy races. We also gain a free feat and a +2 to an ability score of our choice. We'll worry about the +2 in a bit. Between dark vision and the skill, we'll go with dark vision for this one just because it's a bit more thematic with the idea that we are an explorer who is used to being out in the wilderness, be it at daytime or at night. But you could pick either one because we're going to actually be a fairly skilled character too. For our free feat though, we're going to want to pick up Great Weapon Master. This is our big melee damage buff, and yes, it will be very risky to use early on, and it doesn't help improve our stats, but we kind of want to get it out of the way now so we don't have to worry about picking it up later, and we're going to want to use it because we're going to be using a big two-handed weapon for our melee aspect of this build. You could technically go sword and board, or pick up two weapons and use them just like the Drifter in their artwork sort of does with a club and a knife. For the sake of our build though, and really differentiating between melee and ranged, I'm going to say that we're using a big two-handed melee weapon, and we're going to want to use Great Weapon Master to get the most out of that. For our stats, after using point buy, we're going to want to wind up with the following array of ability scores: 16 strength, 14 dexterity, 12 constitution, 10 intelligence, 14 wisdom, and 8 charisma. We're going to put the +2 from our custom lineage into strength and have it at 14 from point buy, which will eventually make it roll over to 16, and the rest are just all from basic point buy. There's nothing else being added or subtracted from them. We're going to want to be spread very wide, but hopefully not too thin. That's why our stats aren't stellar. It would be nice if we could get our HP up a little bit with our constitution, but for now, it is what it is and we'll just deal with it. Plus, we want the multi-classing prerequisites. For our background, the Outlander background is actually pretty perfect for us. It works with our theme very, very well. But you could reasonably choose any other background that you like. And if you wanted an extra free feat, picking up any of the newer backgrounds that have been coming out from Wizards of the Coast recently that give you a free feat for that background could work as well. Of course, if your DM allows. Starting into our actual level breakdown of the build now. At level 1, we're going to start with Ranger. Mechanically, Fighter might be a better pick for damage versatility, but we want Ranger because we can still get that damage versatility, and it helps with our Explorer theme for the Drifter. The Drifter, as it said in their flavor text, is meant to be at home in the wilderness, and no class is more at home in the wilderness than the Ranger. We want to not only be able to switch up what type of damage we're dealing or what type of role in the party we're playing in the middle of combat, but we also want to be able to mix it up in multiple pillars of the game. We won't really be good at social interaction per se, but being able to do both the exploration and combat pillar relatively well is pretty thematic of the Drifter. For Ranger 1, we gain favored terrain and favored enemy, or we can take the Tasha's Cauldron of Everything optional features, favored foe, and deft explorer. For us, I'm going to say we're definitely taking favored foe, because this gives us a mini Hunter's Mark-like effect, and that is going to count as our first versatile because it can be applied to either melee or range damage. For our second feature, I'm going to say we're going to go with Deft Explorer, but this is strictly mechanical and for our theory crafting. If you wanted to go with Favored Terrain, that would actually be really, really good because it would help us thematically feel like a character that is meant to be at home in any wilderness. Technically, we still are sort of at home in any wilderness here, but we don't have the extra benefits of tracking and travel speed that Favored Terrain gives us. Instead, Deft Explorer is going to give us a little buff to our skills right now, which is kind of helpful in various scenarios throughout the game, but it'll also eventually get us an actual mobility buff later on. So that's why we take that here, but you could reasonably pick either of those two features. At level 2, we are a Ranger 2. And here we get to pick up a fighting style, and we also gain our spell casting feature. For our fighting style, we're going to go with archery. Archery is going to help even out the difference between our melee and ranged attacks. And because I didn't specialize into dexterity and just basically boost that a lot in character creation, we're now wanting to use a big two-handed weapon in melee. And if enemies are far away from us, or if we don't want to get into melee, we can switch to ranged damage. And archery will help us become more accurate. It will take us a turn or two to switch between these two combat styles in the middle of combat. For spells, you could pick any that you really want to, but for the sake of argument and for our focus categories, Hunter's Mark is definitely going into versatility for us and would be a great to pick up since it's just a better version of Favored Foe. Long Strider could help our mobility if you wanted to focus more on that, and we'd probably pick it up anyways at some point. And finally, Absorb Elements is part of our durability category because it'll help us whenever we are fighting enemies that don't do the basic bludgeoning, slashing, and piercing damage. At level 3, we've gotten a fair bit of our various categories already, and it's time to flip over to focus on trying to get the ability to switch between playstyles in combat. So we're going to jump over to Rogue. At Rogue 1, we're going to gain Expertise, which just boosts our skills, and that's pretty nice, but those skills don't really fall into any categories, though it does help us feel more of a versatile character outside of combat. We also gain Sneak Attack, and Sneak Attack I'm going to count as a buff to our ranged damage, because right now the only time it's actually applying is on our ranged attacks. Since we also don't have that great of a dexterity score, meaning our ranged damage isn't as good, this is a nice way to boost that ranged damage. 4, we are a Rogue 2, and here we gain Cunning Action. Cunning Action allows us to dash, disengage, or hide as a bonus action. And I personally am going to count this towards our mobility focus category. You could use it more to hide rather than anything else and gain advantage on your ranged attacks, but I'm more worried about being able to dash as a bonus action and then take a big melee swing, or shoot and then dash as a bonus action to have better positioning in combat. Choice is up to you. At level 5, we are Rogue 3. And with Rogue 3, we get our subclass. We're going to pick Thief Rogue because Thief Rogue gets us Fast Hands. And Fast Hands is what we want to really make this build come together. It allows us to use a bonus action that is normally granted by our Cunning Action to instead, well, do a couple different things. But the main thing we want is the Use an Object action. Now, because we can take the Use an Object action as a bonus action, that means that we can get our free Use an Object action to sheathe or draw a weapon once per turn, and then use our Cunning action to do the same thing in order to fully switch between our melee greatsword and our ranged bow, whether it's a crossbow, longbow, shortbow, whatever you feel like. Now with Fast Hands, it's so much easier to harass an enemy at range, approach them, and then use our Cunning action to switch to melee and take a full swing to finish them off. At level 6, we are Ranger 3. And as Ranger 3, we get to pick our Ranger subclass. And we're going to go with Hunter Ranger. Hunter Ranger allows us to pick up one of the Hunter's Prey options. There's Colossus Slayer, Giant Killer, and Horde Breaker, which is the one that we're going to go with. Horde Breaker says that once on each of our turns when we make a weapon attack, you can make another attack with the same weapon against a different creature that is within 5 feet of the original target and within range of our weapon. Now technically this goes under our versatile category, because we can use it in both melee and range. However, I like to think of it a bit more as a melee buff rather than a range buff, simply because our range already has sneak attack, and that only happens once per turn anyways. For melee, the Drifter only has one actual card that is a melee cleave attack. And this is a melee cleave to some extent. Plus I think it'll be a bit more likely that we're going to find two enemies standing next to each other that we're already beside, because they'll be trying to attack us in melee, rather than just two enemies standing next to each other at range. It's obviously pretty situational, but either way we have a pseudo second attack, and even when we do gain extra attack, this will just be even more potential attacks to deal with hordes of creatures. Pretty nice for our drifter, whether you use it as range or melee, or really what we want is for both. At level 7, now we're a ranger 4, and we are going to get our first ability score increase / feat. You can technically pick whatever you like, but I'm going to increase our strength by +2 to get it to 18, and count this as a bonus to our melee focus. It'll make our melee attacks a bit more accurate, and they deal a bit more damage. You can focus whatever you want, but I want to try and get a bit more of a melee buff, because really overall, there's not too many buffs to melee that make it outweigh range. When we attack at range, we might not get hit. And so if we really wanted to just specialize into range, there'd be no point using melee. Well, we want there to be a point to use melee, so we're going to try and keep it even by buffing our melee more than our range, but having our range as a backup for either flying enemies, enemies far away, or just attacking enemies before we actually get to them. Level 8, here's where we're becoming a bit of an absurd character. We're jumping over to Cleric, because we specifically want to pick up the Life Cleric subclass. Not only will Cleric give us healing spells, like Healing Word, we already kind of got Cure Wounds from Ranger if we wanted to pick it up, but now we can pick it up from Ranger or Cleric, and either way it uses our Wisdom, so that synergizes nicely. But we also want a few other spells like Shield of Faith and Divine Favor. Shield of Faith grants us more durability, and Divine Favor grants us more versatility, because that just buffs our weapon damage, doesn't matter whether it's range or melee. And our healing spells are of course support, but so is the Disciple of Life feature. Disciple of Life just says that whenever we cast a healing spell and restore hit points to a creature, that creature gains an additional 2 plus the spell's level. And this is a perfect buff to our healing that feels like the Drifter's buff to their healing. If you wanted more support, you could obviously go further down into Cleric, but we're just keeping with the 1 level because Disciple of Life plus the healing spells we get from Cleric and Ranger, which we can also upcast, give us enough support options for what we want to be able to do as the full versatile drifter. At level 9, we're going to return to Ranger to go Ranger 5, and finally pick up extra attack. At level 10, we're jumping back to Rogue 4, which gives us another ability score increase / feat. At this level, I'm going to say that we're improving our Constitution, which increases our durability, which is pretty nice, but you could obviously take a feat or level up any ability score that you wanted to if you wanted to specialize your drifter a little bit more. For us though, it helps us spread a little bit more throughout the categories beyond just a damage focus and now into more of a defensive focus. One other thing I forgot to mention from our level in Life Cleric is that level in Life Cleric also gives us proficiency in heavy armor. So if you wanted to count that as a durability focus as well, feel free to do so. At level 11, we're jumping back to Ranger for Ranger 6, and now we have our Tasha's Cauldron of Everything feature improvements. Or if you took the regular Ranger features, then they improve as well. But for us, this is a little bit of a damage buff from Favored Foe, but it's mainly the mobility buff from Deft Explorer that we want. We now have a climbing speed and a swimming speed, and all of our speeds just increase by 5 feet. That's really nice, given that we also have Cunning Action to be able to dash twice, if not 3 times in a round, if we really wanted to get a lot of mobility. Level 12, we are a Ranger 7, and we get our next Hunter Ranger feature. This is a defensive tactic. It's again a feature where we get to pick one of 3 options. Escape the Horde is kind of meh, it just gives opportunity attacks against us disadvantage, so we're not taking that. And we're also not taking Steel Will, which just has to do with saving against frightening. It's not really too important for us. What we do want is multi-attack defense. This says that whenever a creature hits us with an attack, we automatically gain a +4 bonus to AC against all subsequent attacks made by that creature for the rest of the turn. Just a free boost to AC. This is definitely a durability focus, and that is definitely something we want as the Drifter. Level 13, we are a Ranger 8, and here we gain another ability score increase / feat. Again, you can pick whatever you want, but for us, I'm going to once again increase our Constitution to get our Constitution up to 18, and that counts as more of a durability focus, since the Drifter in Frosthaven is a big health pool character. Every time they level up, they go up by 2 hit points, as opposed to just 1, or alternating between 1 and 2. supposed to have a lot of hit points to be able to take hits for our party. And that's what we want to do here. It took us a long time to get here, but at least we have a robust health pool now. Level 14, we are Ranger 9, and here we really don't gain anything. There might be some more spells, but there's none that have really stood out as being helpful for any of our various categories. So honestly, we're just taking this level so we can continue up into Ranger later on. At level 15, we are now a Ranger 10, and our optional Tasha's Cauldron of Everything improved once again. We now gain Tireless from our Deft Explorer feature. Tireless, though, allows us to just, as an action, give ourselves some temporary hit points. It's not a lot of temporary hit points, but it's nice to be able to do that relatively on demand, and we don't need to be in combat to do it, and since temporary hit points last pretty much permanently, at least until they're lost or until we take a rest, that's not too bad to sort of prep before going into another room in a dungeon, or before we feel like a fight's coming on. We also have the bonus to be able to remove levels of exhaustion as part of a short rest, but that's less so important since exhaustion doesn't come up too often in D&D, although maybe it does at your table. Level 16, we are Ranger 11, and here we get to pick up the multi-attack Hunter Ranger feature. This says that we get to choose between Volley and Whirlwind Attack, and all they really do is focus on attacking groups of enemies. Now, you could pick whichever one you want and whichever one you're specializing for as well, since Volley is only ranged oriented and Whirlwind Attack is only melee oriented. So this choice kind of determines what your primary fighting style is going to be. Admittedly, I played the Drifter as a more melee oriented character, but for my bias, we're going to take Whirlwind Attack. However, you could pick either one that you wanted, but with Whirlwind Attack, we're now much better at taking on groups of enemies. Whirlwind Attack says as an action, we can make melee attacks against any number of creatures within 5 feet of us, with a separate attack roll for each target. This is probably going to just replace our regular attack when we're facing 3 or more creatures that are right in front of us. But that's pretty reasonable since extra attack only gets us so far anyways. And the nice thing is that we don't really need to worry about extra attack and Hordebreaker because Hordebreaker still stacks with Whirlwind Attack. Hordebreaker just says that once on each of our turns when we make a weapon attack, not when we take the attack action. And Whirlwind Attack certainly lets us attack multiple creatures at once, 2 of which would hopefully be standing within 5 feet of one another, allowing us to then trigger Hordebreaker right after, getting out a little bit more damage on one specific target. Level 17, we're going over to Rogue for Rogue 5, and here we pick up Uncanny Dodge, and our sneak attack is also now 3d6. I kind of glossed over the fact that it was increasing with each of our levels and should have increased way back at Rogue 3, but for what it's worth, we now have both Uncanny Dodge, which is a durability focus, and increased sneak attack, which like I said before, is a range focus. Level 18, we're back to Rogue 6, and here we just gain an improvement to our expertise feature, making us even more skilled. That's really nice for feeling like we're versatile outside of combat rather than just inside of combat. Hopefully, if we've improved some skills related to exploration, we've now got 2 of the pillars of D&D down that we're going to be pretty good at. At level 19, we're going to finish off our rogue levels with Rogue 7, and here we gain Evasion. Evasion is another durability focus feature that really improves our defenses against dexterity-based save features. That's going to be largely AoE type damage, and until now we've been really defended against attacks, but not AoE features. Now here's the bonus that really helps us defend against those AoE features and really improves our durability. Finally, at level 20, we're going to leave off the build with our last ability score improvement / feat from Ranger 12. Here, we're going to improve our Constitution one last time because I'm pretty sure I misspoke and said that we got up to 18 Constitution a few levels ago. That's wrong. We started at 12 Constitution, so we were actually only up at 16. Now we're up to 18 Constitution, and we actually feel like we have a really robust hit point pool. However, as always, you could pick whatever else you wanted. So if you had specialized more into range or support or just mobility, you could pick any other sort of feat or ability score improvement that would help that as well. But for us, we'll just get even more health, making us more of a durable frontline character that also has some good mobility, good support features, and ranged options in their back pocket. Alright, time to summarize our build. First off, let's start with our regrets, just to get them out of the way. The only real thing I regret is also kind of a big one, and that is our stats really suck. We're spread pretty thin. Our dexterity is only a +2 bonus ever, unless of course you increased it, which is fine if we wanted to wear medium armor for our AC, or heavy armor since we did get that from being a life cleric. But for offense, it's really no extra damage. Our wisdom is also stuck at 14, meaning our healing is kind of mediocre at best. However, that's kind of the most efficient way to heal in D&D, given that we'd rather just get someone up who's at 0 hit points rather than top someone off who just got hit once. Finally, our health is really behind in terms of scaling. Drifter is supposed to have lots of health, like I said, and for the first half of the build, we really don't. Overall, though, for the actual Drifter from Frosthaven, I feel that we did capture the Drifter's versatility pretty well. Let's look at what we have in each category. For melee, we have Great Weapon Master, our strength is really nice, and we have Whirlwind Attack. For ranged, we have Archery and Sneak Attack. A little less, but still, ranged also has the bonus of being in the back line and not necessarily taking as many hits. For mobility, we have Cunning Action, we do have Deft Explorer, and then technically we have Long Strider if we pick that spell up as well. For our support, we have Cure Wounds, Healing Word, and of course Disciple of Life to buff all those healing spells that we got already. For our durability, we have a lot. We have our Constitution, we have Absorb Elements, the spell, we have Multi-Attack Defense for attacks, we have Shield of Faith, another great spell for increasing our AC, and we have Evasion, as well as Uncanny Dodge. That is a whole heck of a lot, and really durability is kind of the primary focus of the Drifter anyways. Finally, for our versatile features that could work in both melee and range, we have things that just increase our damage. That's Hunter's Mark, Favored Foe, the Horde Breaker feature, and the Divine Favor spell. We can really react to any possible situation and switch to any role that our party needs. We've got a good division of these features into our different focus categories to really allow us to pick up and do whatever's needed in any event. Overall, though, we are certainly the versatile character, given that we are meant to choose how we want to play or be able to switch to any type of playstyle at the drop of a hat. Let me know what you thought of the build or what you would change to get closer to the actual theme of the Frosthaven character class. Thank you so much for coming on the journey with me, and I hope to see you in the next one.